I never believed in ghosts, curses, or the supernatural until I experienced it myself. It all began when I moved into an old house on Blackwood Lane, a keyed and seemingly peaceful place on the outskirts of town. The house had been abandoned for years, and I got it for an unbelievably low price. It felt like a steal at the time. The peeling paint and overgrown garden were merely cosmetic issues to me, and I envisioned myself restoring it to its former glory. I was ready for a fresh start, leaving behind the chaos of my previous life, and this house felt like a blank canvas. The first few days passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake off a strange feeling, like something was watching me. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. I was in a new place, alone, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I tried to convince myself that the creaks and groans of an old house settling were just part of its charm. But soon, little things began to happen. Doors creaked open on their own, shadows shifted in the corners of my vision, and the air carried a strange damp smell, like old wood rotting away. I told myself it was just the house's age, that I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew something was off. One night, as I was reading in bed, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it again, closer this time. A low, rasping voice murmured my name. My heart pounded as I sat up and scanned the dark room, but nothing was there. The silence that followed felt oppressive, heavy, and I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as my mind erased with thoughts of what could be lurking in the shadows. The next morning, I decided to explore the house more thoroughly. I needed to understand what I had gotten myself into. The basement was a dark, musty place, filled with old furniture draped in white sheets and boxes of forgotten items. It was there that I found an old wooden chest covered in dust. It was locked, but the lock had rusted over time. With some effort, I pried it open, revealing a collection of faded photographs, brittle letters, and a small, intricately carved wooden doll. The letters, written in shaky handwriting, told the story of a woman named Eleanor who had lived in the house decades ago. They spoke of betrayal, heartbreak, and finally, an ominous warning. To whoever finds this, the house belongs to her now. She never forgets. She never forgives. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I read those words. They felt like a direct message, a warning from the past that I had unwittingly ignored. That night, things escalated. As I lay in bed, I felt an unnatural heaviness in the air. The room grew colder, and suddenly, I couldn't move. It was as if something invisible had pinned me down. My breath came in short gasps as I saw a dark figure standing in the corner, a woman with hollow eyes and tangled black hair. The sight was surreal, and yet it felt so achingly real. She opened her mouth and a terrible wailing sound filled the room. It was a sound that resonated deep within me, a cry of anguish that felt like it was tearing through the fabric of my very being. The pressure on my chest grew unbearable. Just as I thought I would pass out, she vanished, and the weight lifted. Gasping for air, I grabbed my phone and bolted out of the room. I spent the night in my car, too terrified to go back inside, the echoes of her wail haunting me. The next day, I searched for information about Eleanor. A local historian told me the grim tale. Eleanor had been a woman scorned, betrayed by the man she loved. In her grief and rage, she had turned to dark magic, cursing the house before taking her own life. Everyone who had lived there since had either died mysteriously or fled in terror. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was not just living in an old house. I was in the grip of a tragedy that had unfolded decades ago, a tragedy that had left its mark on the very walls around me. I had no choice. I needed help. Desperate, I found an old priest who agreed to perform a cleansing ritual. As we entered the house, the air grew thick, suffocating. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and I could feel the weight of the house's history pressing down on us. The moment he began chanting, a piercing scream rang through the walls, a sound so visceral it felt like it was vibrating through my bones. The windows shattered and the lights flickered violently, plunging us into darkness. A dark force lunged at the priest, sending him crashing to the floor, and I felt a surge of panic. I was alone, trapped in a house that was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a vessel of pain and sorrow. In that moment of desperation, I grabbed the wooden doll from the chest, realizing it must be connected to her spirit. It felt heavy in my hands, imbued with an energy that was both unsettling and oddly familiar. Holding it over the fireplace, I hesitated only for a moment before throwing it into the flames. The house trembled, the walls groaning as if they were alive, and I could feel Eleanor's fury rising around me. Then, silence. The air lightened, the shadows faded, and for the first time since moving in, I felt at peace. The oppressive weight that had clung to me like a shroud lifted, and I could breathe again. I stood in the living room, the flickering flames casting warm light around me, and I realized that I had confronted something ancient, something that had lingered far too long. I left the house that very night. The decision was not difficult. I was done with the haunting and the whispers. The next morning, as I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a second, I saw her standing in the upstairs window, watching me go. The hollow eyes that had once filled me with terror now seemed to reflect a sorrow that resonated with my own. I couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy for the woman who had been trapped in that house for so long, a prisoner of her own grief. But I never went back. I drove away from Blackwood Lane, the memories of that house etched into my mind, a reminder of the fragility of life and the weight of unresolved pain. I had entered that house a skeptic, dismissing the supernatural as mere folklore, but I left with a profound understanding of the stories that linger in old places, the echoes of lives once lived, and the shadows that refuse to fade. The experience changed me in ways I couldn't articulate, igniting a curiosity about the unexplained, about the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. In the months that followed, I found myself drawn to the stories of others who had encountered the inexplicable. I read about haunted places, curses, and the supernatural, seeking to understand what had happened to me. But no matter how many stories I read, nothing could compare to my own. The world felt different now, imbued with a sense of mystery that I had never acknowledged before. I had glimpsed a reality beyond my understanding, and it left me both terrified and fascinated. Blackwood Lane would always be a part of me, a chapter in my life that I couldn't erase. I had emerged from the darkness, but the shadows would always linger at the edges of my consciousness, a reminder of the fragile line between belief and disbelief, between the known and the unknown. And while I would never return to that house, I would carry its story with me, a testament to the power of the past and the haunting nature of unresolved pain.